NFL free agency is nearly here. We already have had some signings, but nothing notable outside of trades early in the offseason in the 2021 NFL offseason here. Busy one for us. Welcome to the Footballguys Dynasty Show. I'm your host, Chad Parsons. We've got Jordan McNamara here, and we're talking NFL free agency. We've got one more official show before we're going to be knee-deep in news. You typically a few days before the official, you get a lot of possibilities / probable / likely, and it's already done. Just need to wait for the deadline for it to become official. But we've got a number of quality skill position players this year, Jordan. And what's your just general approach to players entering free agency that are either on your roster or players that you like that are out there in your leagues that you may consider trading for? What's your philosophy in terms of, would you go after them in the weeks or months leading up to free agency occurring? Or is it one where you say there's a lot of leverage to waiting until it actually occurs because there's maybe more downside in getting a bigger discount than potential missing out and the price tag going up?
Generally, free agency makes me nervous, right? And I think generally situations when they become less clear, it's not great for us in Dynasty. So that would be the thing that's my general premise. Is there exceptions to that rule? Sure. But that's my general starting point. I will say right now, there are some key players as we sit here right now that have baked into their price a benefit in free agency. A.J. Dillon is one that we are fans of, that there's no way that Aaron Jones, that the market would be treating them this way if it wasn't that Aaron Jones was nearly a foregone conclusion to leave in free agency. So there are some of those situations that I look at, and I was sort of looking at some numbers over the weekend, and I was like, man, do we really think, are we really that sure about this? And is that a situation where might we want to address it, and so you look at a different one like today, now we get more certainty. I think we can really think much more focused on David Johnson, right? He's going to be back in Houston, signs, basically restructures his deal, guarantees him 2021 on his contract, which is great news as a dynasty, as a dynasty GM with him on your team. Right? And I think he's actually one of those guys that, in the tier in which he belongs right now in terms of valuation, he's a target player, because in that range, if you can sort of bank a top 15 finish, which, assuming his health, I think you can kind of pencil in that range an outcome like that for him. I think you're feeling pretty good about him plugging a need for you. So I do think when we get, there's a lot of question marks when we get some certainty. There's bigger guys too. I mean, there's lots of quarterback movement. This could be a trading plus free agency, strategy concern in terms of things that could really move it. Maybe some of the biggest moving pieces aren't necessarily even free agents or trades.
Yeah. One thing that I put together a few weeks ago, and it's applicable now that we're talking about NFL free agency, and I had another one where it's basically just, players changing teams. And I looked at wide receiver as one of the big notable ones, but I put together a new database. I only looked at about 3 years from 2018 to 2020 of who signed the biggest contracts, and I also looked at who was traded for meaningful capital, meaning, first round picks or second or third round picks at a minimum on the NFL landscape at the skill positions. And what does that look like from what they did the year before to what they did the next year? Because that's really, we live in a microwave society, and it's getting worse, for Dynasty, where we're changing rankings on a daily and hourly basis, and buy run and buy pass on a Sunday, in the fall months. So to look at, when you evaluate what their valuation is today, and you say, I'm really trying to say, where is the market moving? What do I think that's going to happen to their production this coming year? Because beyond that, now you're going to get a whole secondary market, that it's going to be removed from that. It's going to move up or down. But right now, so when something happens in a couple weeks, a player changes teams, or we get that trade, right? Matthew Stafford changing teams, Carson Wentz changing teams. You're really projecting this coming year. And if you're bullish or bearish based on the marketplace, it's that short term. even though it is Dynasty. You're making decisions every day to trade or not trade players. So I looked at it, and so I had between skill positions 40 players that were the biggest contracts and notable. So looking at that through spotrack.com, I like going to that side. There's also Over the Cap. There's a number of sites that track these, very well, that you can go through and quickly peruse by year and by class and by position and all of that. But out of 40, we only had 6 players of the 40 that were a notable improvement. This wasn't static. They genuinely improved their play and points per game for their new environment. So they were a notable uptick player. 6 of 40. And Tom Brady, teaser, was the only quarterback that saw a notable one. And he was, again, he sort of wrote this ticket that he was kind of planning on this. He picked his spot largely. Tampa Bay was loaded. That's what it took of the quarterbacks. Previous changers, we had Phillip Rivers in 2020, Nick Foles, Kirk Cousins changed teams, Case Keenum, Sam Bradford, others, that it was Tom Brady, all-timer. That's what it took. It took notable weapons, and he moved up significantly and was a high impact player, much higher than the year before. But 6 of 40, what I always say is have skepticism. Players changing teams. This is different than Brandon Cooks traded for a first round pick. This is when you out in free agency, they just let you walk. This is like you might have been out of, Kirk Cousins was out of, I think, franchise tags in Washington as, a rare example of just things not going well and just shredding apart like a t-shirt, just being pulled. But like in general, when a team lets you go and doesn't like franchise you or tag you or something, then what does that say? They knew you for 1 year and probably 2, 3, 4 years, depending on where you are in your career arc. So my general take is it's not a good thing. There are scenarios where you're in a bad situation. You could be blocked. You could be with, wide receiver 1, Allen Robinson. Has he really benefited from this situation other than usage? Like quarterback attachment hasn't been great. So we always keep looking and saying, oh, he's going to go to somewhere great. Well, we went to Chicago. That wasn't great. And now they're saying, well, again, I think in general, people overstate the number of significant players that are changing teams. Like this whole, all these quarterbacks are going to be traded and moved and re-signed and all this stuff. It's going to be less than you think, I would think, at the end of the day. It probably just is. Because there's a lot of risk in going outside of what you have. You could go down to one of the worst quarterbacks. You might not think you have the best, but you could drop down from 18 to 30. Be careful. The Joe Flacco syndrome, what you wish for. But I think with Allen Robinson, they could tag Allen Robinson. Don't pretend like he automatically just gets to walk away. His contract is over. There are still team control vehicles to be played for some of these players. So in general, be skeptical. There are rare scenarios, maybe a blocked running back, a number 2 back that ends up getting a starting role, a wide receiver that's a ancillary guy, or a 1A, 1B that gets a clear-cut starting job elsewhere with big money. So there are those exceptions, but most of them, they're leaving for a reason. The team doesn't think they're that good or worth the cost. And then it's kind of like fun money. Greg Cosell always says, I'm not going to get into the salary cap parts. Let's evaluate the players. Why? Because you get to the offseason and people have a lot different amount of money as franchises. So a team that has, Jacksonville, plenty of money, Jets, plenty of money. If these aren't considered attractive locales, the Jets certainly aren't, a great location. They may have to spend more. There was talk that Washington offered more than Dallas for Amari Cooper. Why did he go to Dallas? Let's think quickly on why he went to Dallas for simple reasons. So maybe taking a few less million turns out okay. What would have happened in Washington? Probably not as well as it went for Amari Cooper in Dallas. So again, these teams are going to have to expand. The big players, you're going to have to overspend. So overreacting to what amount they got, it's a different prism of how they're valuing players because draft capital matters. That's finite. You have to earn those things. And then free agency money is just sort of, you kind of have to spend it. So somebody going for 20 million, it doesn't mean they think they're the greatest player and they're going to change their franchise. They might just be, well, we got to spend this money, and they're one of the better options we actually can get, and we got to spend it. So I'm generally going through this skeptically. I know people that know me might view me as a general skeptic, but I view it as like reasonable and logical. And I do get excited about certain things, but free agency, I think, is one where you have to have a skeptical eye of why are they changing teams and why is the team letting them go, and not just exuberance and excitement about the new team.
What's it? Bridled enthusiasm?
Bridal enthusiasm. That's one of my favorite dynasty names.
It's gonna have to be a segment here coming up.
Keep it bridled.
The name, as you were talking, the name that just kept coming into my head about teams letting players walk, and them knowing a lot more information. Hunter Henry, right? They've kind of gotten to a point where with him, and he's been injured. They have a lot of information. The fact that they let him walk and he signed something in the range of what that franchise tag would be, like $8 to $10 million, would sort of be what I think a reasonable expectation for his contract would be. And I think his second tag will be more than that, but somewhere in the range of what they could have committed to paying to him last year, right? They could have gone 4 for 40 or something like that and signed him. If he signs somewhere in the range of that this year, I think that's a big time tell, right? In terms of, hey, there might be problems here that we don't necessarily know. And Todd Gurley, right? The Rams basically cut bait on him, and that kind of foretold the story. I do think that is a pretty wise thing. The other thing I would say too is don't run out of patience. So I have Chase Edmonds, for example, in a number of spots. I've gotten offers and stuff like that right now for him, with the idea that, hey, Drake's going to move. And maybe at some point Edmonds is a trade candidate off of the fact that Drake moves in free agency, but I don't necessarily think it needs to be leading up to it, right? I mean, if you want to do it after Drake signs someplace, right, that is a situation where I think the reward is greater if you trade him after the news than if you trade him right now. What are you going to draw? A late second, something like that at best? You're not going to draw kind of the big time uptick that can really change valuations for your team. So that'd be the other thing I would say is don't get caught basically selling a middle, right? Don't think you're selling high and actually sell moderately low, right? That would sort of be the cautionary thing that I would say.
And the windows aren't finite. Like, don't assume that March 20th is the end of this period. We saw a number of players, and I think running back free agents this year. Yes, Aaron Jones, if he's on the move, I'm sure he's going to sign relatively early and, probably be clearly the top paid guy of that position. But, we have a number of players that might last through the NFL draft. They might draft Devonta Freeman. Remember, we were, everyone was a little surprised. He made it all the way. He was kind of holding out. Those jobs dried up last offseason, and he was trying to find an opportunity. It took till in season with Saquon Barkley going down. And I think it was even beyond that Devonta Freeman signed, so Kenyon Drake, you may not get clarity, and there may be talk, he could go back to Arizona for a low-level deal. That may be, March 27th. There's sort of dialogue about, he hasn't signed yet and stuff. So thinking that there's this window on any particular player, especially with running backs, that, there's no clarity here, but the possibility of them returning, right? Leonard Fournette going back to Tampa Bay could be a possibility, but they might explore other angles. They might go through some semblance of the summer where Fournette's still out there or a notable running back. And, they're trying out Keyshawn Vaughn a little bit. What do we have here going into year 2? Maybe they didn't find what they wanted in a day 3 running back or round 3 or whatever in the draft. They went through this whole process and then they circle back to someone that they know or someone that is still out there in July, August, September. So especially with a situational, a lot of leverage with running back usage based on the depth chart, just that clarity, it really comes down to the player. Do you believe, like, sometime the NFL is either going to agree with you or not agree with you? Do you think Chase Edmonds is going to be a player going all the way to week 1 that Arizona says, this is our depth chart, we're happy with Chase Edmonds as our number 1, and you believe as a dynasty GM that he can be a full season or start of the season plan to be a starter? Intrinsically, just hearing that phrase, you're either kind of on board with that or not on board with that, and more skeptical or more optimistic that it could happen. I'm a little more skeptical, but could it happen? Could it be the default? But there's still plenty of hurdles to get there. So really trying to navigate and sharpshoot the ideal window. I think there's risk and chances throughout this entire thing, to get it right or miss slightly. But I think the general overarching approach is, do you believe in the player, and do you believe in the player enough to get opportunities beyond maybe what they currently are? This is the time of year to ask yourself those questions. Just like in a startup draft, when you have a myriad of options every step of the way, you really find out how you feel about player versus player beyond ranking them on a page, beyond your existing teams, because now the stakes are a lot higher.
Yeah, no question. This is one of the most fun times of the calendar too, because a lot of things move, a lot of information happening quick. It's prepare for it, and I think you can make good deals at this time of year.
Yeah, now to early May. It's a great time. It's a great time to be alive and be in a few leagues and taking your bets, with market share and exposure across veterans. But I always say every day, when trading is open, you are choosing not to trade a player. So yeah, you might have been slammed. You might have had 0 minutes to think about your teams, but just know you have opportunities throughout this entire process. And it does not take someone coming to you. If you wait to sell a player for people to come to you, you're not going to make many deals at all. So you got to knock on doors. You got to cold call, or at least discuss if that is your methodology there within your league of bring that up. What's your interest level in player such and such? Start that process. Otherwise, you're going to look back weeks or months or years later and be like, I can't believe I held this guy through the up and all the way back down the mountain place. So we also have Dynasty Trades we're discussing, plus our quotes from the Shark Pool Dynasty Trades Forum of the Week. This is Chad Parsons, Jordan McNamara, episode 44 of the Footballguys Dynasty Show. And I always think back with 44 to Matt Asiata. And this is before, we did this show, but Matt Asiata versus Jerick McKinnon there in Minnesota was one where this fullback, this retread was getting goal line touches. Look at that. What do you got there?
Little Floyd Little rocking the Syracuse 44. I can't get him right.
There you go.
Rest in peace.
And yeah, I remember, Jerick McKinnon was a guy I loved coming out in rookie draft time. And, Minnesota, we talk about telling us what we need to know, right? Never really the lead guy, had plenty of opportunities. And yet he goes over to San Francisco, multiple injuries, shade, a good chunk of his career in the back half, certainly as well. But yeah, that's always a player I remember, and Matt Asiata will ever be connected to Jerick McKinnon's early career as well. So let's talk some dynasty trades, and we've got some interesting ones. So I always try to look at ones that, is there a team direction at play? We talk about strategy points. We talk about player value. This is 12-team super flex. I always smirk at that because if it doesn't involve picks or quarterbacks, it could be 2 tight end and 9 points per passing touchdown. Not applicable in this case. But this is basically trading the possibles for the already has done it. So Chase Claypool, one of the hot names at one time after a 40-point explosion last year, was being discussed as one of the rookies that was wide receiver 1 in Dynasty. So we have Chase Claypool, we have Darnell Mooney for Mr. Amari Cooper, who some people I would guess are projecting CeeDee Lamb to overtake him. Some people are looking, not properly in my opinion, looking at the splits with Dak Prescott in the lineup with Amari Cooper as, I believe, the wide receiver 1. Is that true, Jordan? I know he's a high wide receiver 1 at that point in time. He may have been number 1 overall. I don't have that quotable right in front of me. And then after that, obviously Gallup, Lamb, and Cooper all took a tremendous step back with that quarterback change.
Yeah, this one, when you look at the market, it's pretty close. One thing that I've been doing is looking at what I call density ranks, which is basically, or density tracks, which is look at where a player is historically in terms of hits. And I use top 24 as just a benchmark. And then with their draft round, to give you an idea, a set of comps to use historically, it'll tell you, hey, what's the hit rate on guys like that? So, for example, Cooper, with being a first-round guy with 5 career top 24 seasonal finishes, 77% of those guys have gone on for another hit. 50% of the guys that have hit once for a top 12 season, as he has done, have gone on for 2 more top 12 seasonal finishes. So really good numbers there when you look at him. When you look at Chase Claypool, Claypool. 67% have gone on for another top 24 season as a second round guy with one hit. But when you look at the big time elite hits, only 16% do that double top 12 seasonal finish. So people really want that for him. When you look at his historical comps, not so great. Again, the market pretty even on them. I think this is a smash for Amari Cooper. And this is one of those trades where I think you look back on in a couple years and kind of that moment where you're like, man, I could have sold for what's a really elite, like blue chip prospect, and I sold. And I didn't, right? I mean, and Darnell Mooney should not get in the way of you trading Chase Claypool for Amari Cooper, right? That should value very little in your evaluation of this trade.
Yeah, and I think what sucked people in is the possibilities, right? The possibilities that Chase Claypool is the next great thing, and the fear of missing out on that. And we talk all the time, like, how about you just hit some doubles and triples, and if you miss out occasionally on a home run, if you made this type of trade, you drafted Chase Claypool late second round, early third round of your rookie draft, I mean, you would trade that pick hand over fist for Amari Cooper, right? And we're ignoring Darnell Mooney, but I think for the sake of conversation, I mean, Mooney's a nice story. He's coming from day 3 though, and it was mainly about, a flash here and there. And he really is not a big factor of this trade. This is not, your feelings on Darnell Mooney does not impact whether you like one side or the other of this deal. So no offense to him, but with Claypool, like you mentioned, he was a boom bust prospect. Let's not forget James Washington is there. Deontay Johnson gets a heck of a lot of targets, and Ben Roethlisberger back for this year, but probably it. Question mark at quarterback. Are they going to fall to the bottom enough to get an elite prospect? Does an elite prospect fix your depth chart? We know the veteran bucket typically passed around the NFL at quarterback. So they could have quarterback questions. Is he really the true number one? We just don't have those questions in my view. With Dak Prescott likely back in Dallas, they're going to get something done. They'd be crazy not to. And you've got Amari Cooper right there atop the depth chart, firmly in his prime, producing. And like you said, I mean, the likelihood of one of these guys turning top 12 or multiple I mean, the downside is you take the Claypool side, and I don't think that's overly close. I mean, a lot of people want to run Amari Cooper out of the building. And I think part of that is, I think someone looked at, look at what he does in fantasy playoffs, or look at what, looking at very small sample sizes and then saying that's indicative of a player. But, being streaky or being high variance is not a bad thing. The fact that he's able to put up 30 plus games, 40 plus games is the important part. A wide receiver putting up a 9 in your fantasy lineup does not move the needle negatively like people think it does. How about you put 3 guys in at wide receiver and all of them could put up 30 plus? And if one of them does, you're fine at the position for the week. You're just good. So a down week does not really matter at wide receiver as much as people think. And I know you've said some stats on that in previous episodes. All right, we've got an Ezekiel Elliott trade, so that's going to make it an interesting one for sure. We've got FFPC Superflex, so it does impact one of the rookie picks that's involved in this deal. We've got Ezekiel Elliott and Julio Jones for 105 and Laviska Shenault. Can
we just break this into pieces just for a second?
Yeah, please do.
With Zeke, if you were going to stack them up against the skill position 9 quarterbacks in this class, where would you stack them up?
1.
Right. You would take him over Jamar Chase and any running back, any wide receiver.
Not everybody would, though.
But you would.
He's a falling knife, Jordan. He's almost out of the league.
Right. He's what? He's be 26. Right. Yeah.
He's a 4.8. He's a 4.8 40 guy now. He's a glorified fullback. And I've seen this. Tony Pollard will take his job. I've heard some say that.
How's the contract situation with that all going to work out? Because it ain't.
Let's wait for that. Yeah, exactly. Pollard's getting in the back half of the rookie deal. Zeke is a high investment player. He's actually on a Hall of Fame track off of one quote unquote down year that was still pretty good for a lot of career peaks for others.
Okay, so that puts us at a very specific point, which is, at worst, you're taking him as basically the best skill position player. And then we could sort of talk about quarterback. I think it's totally irrelevant because you're taking Julio over Laviska Shenault. And I don't think that one's particularly close. And you sort of look at this. You imagine sitting there with 1-5 and be like, man, I kind of was like just missing the playoffs. It's like, I'm in sort of rough shape. And you're like, well, I could add Zeke and Julio to my lineup. And that's that. Now I'm like,
but shallow rosters, Jordan, they might be close. They might be close to your cut line. So that you have to factor that in. I mean, just like Laviska Shenault close to your cut line, Zeke and Julio could be. Now you've got roster cut problems over the next few weeks for FFPC cut down day.
Yeah, he's totally
105. You knew was going to make your roster. Now you don't know with Julio.
Yeah, it's a smash for the Zeke Julio side for me.
Yeah, well, and I think the highlight of this is just. I think a lot of people, it gets cute, right? That Julio Jones, I want to get out before the bottom falls out, right? What if what if he's in and out of lineups? Like, it frustrates me so much. He actually doesn't miss many games. And even his partial games are better than a lot of guys playing full snap shares. So he's still one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. He's got Matt Ryan. And the fact that he could move the needle, even if it's 1 year, let's say Julio plays 1 year and retires next off season, he likely produces more impact value than Laviska Shenault does for the rest of his career, right? I mean,
correct.
I just think people, yes, there's upside if Shenault hits big, if he's the next greatest thing, and you get the quarterback upgrade, things are terrific. People glob on to whatever is like the 3, 5, 7% outcome, of what if things are perfect and I'm selling him at this point and the other guy is the smart guy, in this trade and really got one over me. Zeke is really on the downside. He's like a mid to high running back 2 this past year. And that's the best it'll ever be. It's a big committee now. Dak's gone. It's going to so you almost tell yourself worst case scenario about all the other players. But this is the proper way to sell rookie picks early. When if the fever is this intense, this is someone running a 104. Get them to the hospital. So you've got to leverage that. And you know what? Shop in your first round pick, but aim high. And I love what they did. They looked for 2 depressed at career low profile points, right? For their stock. And you're trading 105, and 105 hasn't peaked. But this is even if you have 103, make offers like this that try to get undervalued players. Who's undervalued to you? Who has a strong profile to you? That could be Amari Cooper, could be Zeke, could be Allen Robinson, could be a number of guys like that. Michael Thomas. Go after, knock on doors. But otherwise, you could probably get deals like this or closer to done when you get on the clock.
Totally agree with all that. Can you imagine Julio and Laviska Shenault are basically going back to back in real drafts? So Julio is 33 at the 8-9 turn in Superflex, and then you look at Laviska Shenault, and he's going basically right there. He's going at 32 at 905. So, I mean, it is just it's a pretty wild. It's just pretty wild. And when you get 2 guys at the same cost, just as a really easy rule of thumb, when you get 2 guys at the same cost, the guy who's hit substantially better bet. Historically,
what you're saying is stop pleasing the market, right? I mean, the pretty 22-year-old that's done a little bit of something, but is it meaningful? No. And again, his top season is not going to be likely close to Julio's 7th worst season. So you've really got to keep that in mind. And yes, Julio Jones is not going up in value, in market liquidity. That's okay. You can have guys like Julio, Adam Thielen, guys like that as part of they're starting right now. Is this the last year I start them? Maybe. Is it 2 years? Is it 3 years? Who cares? Who cares? That's part of your team. You can also have, other guys like you can have CeeDee Lamb with them or Brandon Ayuk, or you can have young players along with them. You can be drafting a notable 2021 rookie wide receiver to be a part of that group. But it doesn't mean you have to just eliminate. It's pretty roster syndrome. It really is. This deal is exactly that. I got Laviska Shenault. He's going to blow up when Trevor Lawrence gets drafted. Really? He still hasn't produced a point with Trevor Lawrence. He might not be the wide receiver 1 on his own team. And then you got 105. Oh, I'm going to be so liquid and insulated. Like Zeke and Julio might go down in value between now and the NFL draft. How? How will they go down? Calvin Ridley's there. Are they really drafting a first round wide receiver? And Ezekiel Elliott, they draft another running back. What's really going to happen to these guys? So I just think you're overthinking and getting over your skis there to a significant degree. All right, this is an interesting one. We've mentioned him in passing a couple times. Dak Prescott, stock format. So it's FFPC. It's pretty shallow. We've talked about how quarterback, sometimes your backup quarterback is the waiver wire, in settings like that. Save those roster spots. But this is trading 211 and a second round pick next year for Dak Prescott. So obviously Dak Prescott, is going to be ready for week 1, but he could absolutely be that one quarterback you actually have rostered. And you're one of the few teams that would be interested in buying a quarterback. Do you think this is a reasonable price for him?
What's interesting is when you compare it to those picks, right? I hate selling future picks. Just something I hate to do because you're giving away flexibility and liquidity. But in FFPC, they're much closer to a roster line on a good team. And so you're getting what I think is number 2, number 3 quarterback in Dynasty at what prices that are outside the top $150 in startup drafts. I mean, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, and again, if he isn't ready for week 1, I mean, there's going to be an NFL starter, if not 5, on your league's waiver wire. You float that until Dak's ready to go or whatever. But the fact that most weeks outside of bye, you can just have Dak Prescott and no one else is a big perk. The fact that he was an elite producer last year and they're rolling back basically all their weapons, plus adding back Blake Jarwin, as someone who missed the whole year and was viewed as they signed him to a nice deal to be the starter. And Dalton Schultz was just, shoulder shrug. Okay. But yeah, I think this is the type, you mentioned it before. Sometimes in a 1 quarterback league, there's minimal market of teams looking to buy, and you can get somebody. They might have Dak and another notable quarterback, and that's the reason they're willing to let him go. That he might be near their cut line. They might have 3 quarterbacks, and you're the only real buyer. So that's when you can really leverage that. I'm actually surprised to some degree, they had to pay this much, because it can be such a buyer's market in that regard. Let's do one more. And actually a player we haven't discussed too much between us, but Derrick Henry. This is also FFPC. That's the time of year. You're going to get lots of FFPC trades. So Derrick Henry, 27 years old, still locked in with Tennessee for Chris Godwin, who free agency, there's discussion, maybe he'll come back, but do you view him as a true number 1 guy? How much does he really matter within the top 15, 20, 25 wide receivers in Dynasty and the NFL? So you get Derrick Henry versus Chris Godwin.
I think the clear upside play is Derrick Henry. And if you wanted to say, hey, Chris Godwin has more longevity, I guess I could see that argument. But at the flip side, God's had 1 good year. And that's not to knock on his good year, but to knock on the rest of the years that weren't good, right? He had one top 12 seasonal finish, and outside of that, in 4 years, hasn't broken the top 24. So when you look at that, you could say, all right, it was variety of factors, all that stuff. I mean, Derrick Henry's Mr. Consistent top 12 guy. In 3 years, could you look back and say, hey, I'd rather have Chris Godwin in 3 years from now? Maybe. I think Derrick Henry is pretty interesting right now in the short term. I think he has a lot more upside than Chris Godwin does. I think we're going to look back in a few years and realize that Chris Godwin year was much more of an aberration than it was who he really is.
And Derrick Henry is really consolidating, right? I mean, running backs that have a workhorse type usage and profile and outlook, even if it's just this season and next season for Derrick Henry, consolidating a lot of those future projected points into 2 years of outside of getting hurt. I mean, he's going to run the show again in Tennessee. We'll see what happens beyond in 2022, but putting that into a short span of time, I think this idea that you're locking in a wide receiver, and let's, using Chris Godwin here, that, well, he's young, so therefore it's another 3, 5, 7 year window, and he's going to be relevant and, a meaningful role in a passing game and still productive and healthy and getting new contracts and all these things. That doesn't happen to a high degree of NFL players, just period, looking out that far of a lens. So I really think a lot of this looking out, and you see a young wide receiver and you're giving them fold over fold of benefit for their age of saying they could be a player for my team for a decade. Is your dynasty team going to be around in the league going to be around in a decade? So, not to say impending doom for all dynasty leagues out there, but invariably a percentage of them fold. It could be half the league that just randomly those 6 people are going to do other things. And the league is like, do we want to do a dispersals draft? Or so, it's not super fragile, but what I'm pointing to is, some 24-year-old and going, oh, well, in 3 years, this is going to be, Henry could be worthless. He could be. And you know what? If he's still around at 30 years old as a power back, yeah, he's probably going to lose plenty of juice dynasty wise and, efficiency wise, all these types of things. Sure. But until then, so you don't have to play it like redraft, but to assume Chris Godwin is still going to be on a strong track and he had 2 or 3 good years in the next 3 and he's 26. Well, I guess at that point he's 27 or 28. So he's still hanging on, good value, and Derrick Henry is worth a penny and a half. That's a lot of projecting and a lot of and you're just going to, put into the gutter that Derrick Henry was, running back 7 this year and, or running back 4 and next year he's running back 7. And yeah, maybe he was running back 19 after that and then 37 and then he's gone. But don't just throw it out with the trash that he was, 2 top 8 seasons in the next 2, because that's not where we are in 2023. So I think that's pretty disrespectful, and that's sort of like not remembering the impact he could have on your right here and now. All right. We got quotes from the Football Guys and Dynasty Forum this week. Let's spice it up, Jordan. We've got Kareem Hunt doesn't cap Nick Chubb's output. We've got Hunt just has an unusually high number 2 running back production.
I think there's receiving game there for Nick Chubb that could be unlocked if Kareem Hunt wasn't there. Does it affect... does it move the central part of his projection? Maybe a little bit, but I think ultimately it's probably not something it matters super much. And when you look at wins, is it maybe a couple tenths of a win? Maybe. But ultimately you're trying to hit, we talk about hitting doubles, hitting broad targets. That's a pretty broad target in terms of his usage and all that. So could he catch 50 balls without Kareem Hunt? Maybe. But is that a ton different than what he's done? Not that anything that's going to move him from. We're not talking about a move from. We're not talking about Kareem Hunt being the difference of Nick Chubb being running back 26 to running back 4. We're talking about Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt maybe being the difference between Nick Chubb projection is running back 8 to running back 4. It's not that big of a difference. It's sort
lower
of
running back 1 to maybe higher running back 1.
Correct.
But in the magical 1 year, I will say, watching those Browns games, a number of times where Hunt would come in the red zone, I thought Hunt was actually really good in terms of scoring as a receiver. So that those are factors. And yeah, I mean, Hunt is better than your average number 2 back in the NFL. I mean, heck, he was a strong starter in his own right early in his career. So, but like you're saying, the brass tacks of how much does that actually matter to your team and, win probabilities and all of that for Nick Chubb, it's not tremendous, because Chubb is already there. And I think because they have Kareem Hunt, that's why their DNA is more as a running team. 2 of your best offensive players are both running backs. Shouldn't that be how you play offense? We're going to cater to that, and especially if you have Baker Mayfield, who you may have like, is he really a facilitator, a high leverage quarterback, or is he just a good quarterback that, we're going to definitely be open about going towards the 2 running backs that we do have for now. This is regarding where does Trevor Lawrence go in Superflex drafts? So this is the topic du jour here. 101 in probably 99% of leagues. The 1% of leagues where would be people that have already have quarterback dialed in and didn't figure out how to move back or didn't understand they should have taken Lawrence regardless if they couldn't move out of that position.
Yeah, you don't ever address need in a rookie draft by your selection. Now, can you say, hey, I have a depth problem, I want to move down, those sorts of things? You can talk about that. Never on the clock do you say, this is a position I need. Let's do that. I think he's going to be the consensus 101 rookie draft. I think he'll be the 1.010, right? When you round it out, that's what it ends up being. I don't think that there will be a positional player above him, and I don't think there probably should be.
Okay.
The question is,
Yeah,
do you want to spend that? Right? Is that how you want to use the pick? Right? Because I think the 101 is him. The question is, do you want to do that?
Yeah. Now, what is your idea there that they didn't understand they should have taken Lawrence regardless if they couldn't move it? What's your thoughts if you don't think Lawrence is, if he's not your 101, let's say, and you're there at 101? People had this, that last year Clyde Edwards-Helaire was, depending on the time of the draft, considered the 101. And it's like, well, if you don't want to take him, the optimal thing would be to not take him. So I just, what are your thoughts on that? So if you don't think Lawrence is your 101 and you're sitting at 101, you have to trade or you have to take Lawrence at 101? Are those the only two options in your mind tactically?
I would, if it was me, I would take Lawrence because I think he is the 101. Have we been in situations last year where he wasn't nearly as consensus of a 101? It was very muddled in terms of to say. We could look at that multiple ways about who was the highest rookie in that class. I think it's fine to go the other way if you don't think that. I think that would be almost universally the consensus answer, which is that he's the right pick. If it was a scenario where, well, let's just change the class. I don't think that there's anyone that could break the ceiling on that. To me, if you think that, then that's fine. To me, it would take, with what Lawrence is worth right. I mean, he's a first-round startup pick. You have to kind of think about that in terms of, is this other person worth that? I mean, that.
Well, and to say you couldn't trade him, to say that you couldn't trade the pick, that's also taking a leap, because if you're flexible from 2 through, packages of veterans, etc., you will have options that, if you're not big on Lawrence to the extent of being a first-round startup pick or something like that, you're going to have plenty of options if you explore those. So that's the part that's a reach for me of that whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. We could sort of say, I don't need to follow consensus. We don't need to follow ADP. And this, as a general rule, we can sit there and take an unpopular pick on the clock. That's fine. This one's tough to do that with as a practical matter because it's so expensive. You just don't get, guys. It's a rare year to get a first round startup pick at 1. So I think I would take it and figure out a way to move. And this is one of those things where it's there's different windows to look at this. 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years. Right? The 2-2-2 rule, which is, I could take the player right now, and that allows me to make a move over the next 2 weeks to maybe shut off what I have some additional depth, or I can look over a medium term and say, hey, up to the beginning of the season, I have multiple different ways that I can now treat. I have some depth at quarterback. I can deal from it to sort of fix other things. And then over the long term, right, you can do that. You can play that same game. We could debate this. I don't think the price is going to fall through the floor on Trevor Lawrence. I don't think it's going to. I think it's an unlikely outcome. I think it's more possible than people would say. Hint, hint, Baker Mayfield a couple years ago, who was actually going higher relative to the rest of the position than Trevor is going right now, and look where he is. So all of those things to say, I would take Lawrence even if I'm not like super in love with the valuation.
I would take Akers over Ezekiel Elliott as the best player in the deal, and kind of easily.
I made a bad trade about a year ago. And this was right around the time that Akers I was in the playoff hunt. Dallas was sort of cooking. Akers was being banished to Siberia. And I traded I traded Akers in what I thought was going to be a later first for Zeke. And that doesn't look quite as good now as it did, considering how it all turned out. I think if you looked at the metrics, you would say Zeke's the safer bet. I can understand why the market likes Akers as a higher upside guy going forward.
Is Akers getting too hot? He feels like one of the
Yes.
it guys of the offseason. I like Cam Akers quite a bit. And I feel like, yes, the market has gotten to where I was, sort of where I had him as my running back 2, just for transparency's sake, of last year's class behind Jonathan Taylor at running back. And obviously, in the early weeks of the season, that looked horrific compared to Edwards-Helaire, and there's oscillations. But we saw what that could be late in the year. But over the arch of the season, Akers didn't have a great year one. Obviously, it finished strong. It looks positive going into the offseason, this season, etc. But do you think it's a little bit hot in terms of projecting it with as much certainty as there feels out there?
So he's one of the biggest disconnects in the entire market in terms of, I talk about base rates, which is, or density rates. We've mentioned these. Base rates is basically, we know he's a second round running back entering the second year of his career without a top 24 seasonal finish. We know historically 48.57% of those guys go on to produce a top 24 seasonal finish. That's less than 50. Okay. Is there a variety of players in that range? Yes. That's the starting point to think of him from. The market, when you translate out his ADP, run a regression, look at his ADP, nerdy, geeky analytics stuff, 78% is the implied hit rate. So when you comp him, that is perhaps the biggest disconnect in all of Dynasty. When you look at those two numbers. So that is one that I would say, put the brakes on a little bit. Dobbins is a similar way. We got a better sample size on Dobbins. He just missed out on that threshold. The market is implying 20% chance that he gets 2 top 12 seasonal finishes in his career. 36% chance that he produces 2 top 12 seasonal finishes over the rest of his career. Historically, that's happened 21% of the time where he's at. So the market really is overcooking his profile. Again, should we adjust up that base rate? Yes. Is running back 8 a little bit rich? I mean, I over Jacobs is, I think, the wrong bet. So I would have Jacobs ahead of him. Dobbins is behind him. I sort of understand that one. Again, I think having him ahead of Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a dangerous. I mean, that might be right. But historically, that has been wrong. You can't make that bet very many times and it work out. You might be able to do it in this one, but that's a very, very dangerous bet to keep doing. And we keep docking guys like Jacobs and Clyde Edwards-Helaire at our own peril, because those are really, really good profiles. And honestly, I mean, running back, what's amazing to me is you look at Jacobs right now, running back 8 finished last year. Where would Cam Akers go right now if he finished as running back 8 last year? I mean, he's going running back 8 right now in RDP. If he finishes with a running back 8 finish this year, how high do you think he goes in RDP?
Well, he can't go too high. I mean, unless you're saying he's going to jump, Barkley, McCaffrey, Kamara, I guess would be possible considering age difference. I mean, but still you're talking about, I mean, at best you're probably in running Jonathan Taylor. I mean, how much does he overproduce him potentially under that prism? So, I mean, running back 3, 4, 5. So, right. Like you're saying, I mean, being a wild success, there's not a lot of upside beyond that, but also, when you get into the top 15, 20, 25 of overall, premise for players, you just don't have a ton of upside already. So that's the part of it where we always talk about mitigating risks. And the part that really gets me is everything you kind of said. I'm exactly where it's like there's some disconnect historically here about expectations versus what he's done so far. But yet, we are talking about a guy on a depth chart where they already have another day 2 guy that he zoomed past. So you figure they're not going to address the position. There's already been Sean McVay talking that, we really like this guy. The trajectory. This is kind of what we thought he could be and project to be. So this feels like it's relatively declared. You got Matt Stafford in there. You've got a fully functional offense. We saw him kind of be that workhorse. And we're talking about a guy that's like a top 1-2% metric profile. So there is a lot to like. But like you're saying, like we zoomed all the way up to the off ramp to Disneyland when you technically, I mean, there's already guys that are in the park, right? I mean, there's already admissions being punched that Cam Akers, if he, I mean, this may be a laughable conversation we're having in October, right? I mean, he may be a top 3, 4, 5 producer in the first 4 to 6 weeks, and we're like, remember that we were kind of talking about Cam Akers on like you're like, oh, these guys getting into their numbers and like all these historical probabilities. It's like, scout the player. Scout the player. Don't scout him in an Excel sheet. And so I get that part of it too. And again, I don't want to paint this brush like Cam Akers isn't one of my guys. He absolutely was. I think he was my top drafted, or one of the top 2 or 3 overall drafted exposure guys in rookie drafts last year across my 40 leagues. So trust me, I'm right there.
Better not be. Don't commit that player adultery on me.
He's top 2 or 3. I leave myself some outs there to not know my data there. But yeah, I just so know that's it's almost like, if you're a parent, you got to dole out some discipline. Trust me, I love you, Cam Akers, but just we're both painting the same picture, which is this thing is getting intense and it's very early. So be careful is what we're saying. All right, let's finish out strong. Little rapid fire here. Barring injury, a team is much likelier to win this season with Nick Chubb than with Josh Jacobs and the 103.
No.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we can move on. That's a quick one. I would be very surprised if Philadelphia drafted a quarterback and the 105 Superflex could be a small price to pay for Hurts 9 months from now.
I reject the idea that it's a small likelihood. I think that it's a pretty high chance. Is it more than 50-50? I don't know. I'd put it at a coin flip, but that's a lot of risk on Jalen Hurts at one. That's
do you think
a lot of risk at 105?
Do you think it's possible 9 months from now, so the end of the year, that 105 looks like a bargain to pay for Jalen Hurts in Superflex?
Seems very unlikely. Let me ask you this. Let's assume we get all the way through the process. Let's look back for a second. Let's fast forward 2 months. They don't take a quarterback. What do you have to add to 105 to get Jalen Hurts?
A nominal amount.
Yeah. So why not just pay the nominal amount then do it then
take it all out, right?
Catastrophe, right? That's
free agency, a trade, a draft, right?
Yeah, that's the insurance premium. All right.
But now everyone's saying, well, what if they draft a wide receiver? See, now Jalen Hurts is going to go skyrocket because they draft a wide receiver in the top 10. It's going to change everything.
Yeah. All right. I view that as an insurance policy. Just wait and say, all right, fine. If I want to do that, I'll do it after. I'll pay an extra second. That would be my take on that.
This is more for artistry than game-breaking news release here. But I love the way they put this. N'Keal Harry's ceiling is approximately that of one in a crawl space. Well done. Do you think, like, does the data part of you say N'Keal Harry, if he's free, is definitely interesting, guys, or are you like, he's so far gone that it just is not worth your time?
I mean, if he's free, and assuming the roster spot isn't a crunch, fine, I'll check it out. But I think the odds of him hitting, we were talking about these base rates a little bit a minute ago. I can just check what his is. It's not very high. And so when you just think about the how quick these guys, and just to mind you, 17% would be historically what it is. Just remember N'Keal Harry when anyone tries to pitch you on the idea of market insulation about really high rookie picks. That's just all I would say about him.
It's been 2 seasons.
Yeah.
2 seasons.
Yeah.
Laquan Treadwell was
or Joe Burrow for
seasons.
that matter. Or Tua. Right? Market insulation. Okay.
Yeah, Tua's insulation was what? A few starts? And they're like, oh, let's go back to Fitzy. Let's get him in here. This season actually matters. That's not a good look, right? Like, he's one of the more interesting guys. Like he didn't. It's so rare to see some guy. Anyway, we got one more here. At this point, I view Evan Ingram as hot garbage. Happy to get rid of him. Ingram has always been a jag to me, which is just a guy for.
Yeah, so we met him, and he was. I was taller than him, which I think was a notable development.
You're tall though. You're sneaky tall. Actually, not even sneaky. I mean, you're just tall.
Okay.
You weren't taller than OJ Howard.
I was not, but we did for the same 2-year period in college catch about the same amount of touchdown passes. And I didn't play football. So Evan Ingram, it's interesting. I was looking at some of the data on him today. The market implies a 19% rate of 2 top 6 seasonal finishes, right? So basically top half of the position historically. His profile 38%. So I do think the market's undercooking some of his upside. When you say, hey, look, he's at basically tight end 11. I mean, that's a really nice price to pay in terms of getting a profile. I do think he's not old, and I wonder if he's on the move this offseason. I think that's something that could potentially benefit him. And one thing I'll say about tight ends on rookie deals, Eric Ebron's a good example of this. Sometimes they're hard to use, and
it just doesn't work sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes it's really tough to use a tight end, and he's had some changing coaches. I'll just say sometimes things don't go smoothly. He's sort of checked the box for me so far. Has it been an elite check? No, but I do think he's got plenty to still offer. It's so funny because Kittle's only hit one more time than Ingram has in their career. They're the same year coming out, and just the narrative on them is so massively different.
Yeah, and I would say in my adjusted points per game, I mean, Ingram's worst finish is tight end 16. So he's kind of priced at, we're it's almost like Zeke and some of these other guys where, let's judge him in his worst season and let's put him there and ignore the other things going on with his profile. So yeah, Ingram is one where 5th-year option enabled. You don't like to see that with the Giants, and now he could be freed. He could be out there in free agency, and that could be, are they going to franchise tag him? How well does this year have to go? I think, just the fact that you see him running 3-yard routes. I mean, talk about not optimizing the elite historic speed he has for the position. He's basically a wide receiver, and they're not using him that way as a seam splitter almost at all. A few deep overs here and there, but just it's frustrating to watch him and how they use him. And yeah, does he drop some passes? Sure. But I think the game-changing play and potential he has, I think Eric Ebron is kind of spot on, and he's a more athletic version of that, of just if he gets with another team, like you said, 1 to 2 years from now, this could look laughable in terms of the deals you're getting. I've gotten a couple more shares, and I already had plenty just because the upside is immense, as you said, sort of the implied market touch on him versus the upside he actually presents as a profile. All right, so that'll do it. Remember to subscribe, rate, and review the Football Guys platform of shows on all your listening apps. Sign up for that Football Guys daily email update at footballguys.com/free. In this episode, we discussed a little bit about free agency, that dynasty mindset, a number of players in trading, always talking about profiles. We're talking about cut line players. We're talking about projecting players that have not done it, and it is various baselines and thresholds across the skill positions. Be very careful when you're trading players that have the profiles for players that do not have the profiles. That is one where you can turn good teams into average teams to bad teams, and bad teams into teams with very little hope and or looking for new general managers in your dynasty leagues. You see that across with a ton of orphans out there right now looking for new opportunities across a number of hosting platforms. So for Jordan McNamara, I am Chad Parsons. Until next time, good luck in your dynasty leagues.